Okay, well, thank you all for joining. For those, hello, Senator. How are you doing? Nice to see you this morning. So, Senator DiMacedo is joining us. For those of you who are not familiar with this, we are recording this to take out excerpts for our website, and I think some of them we actually have available in their entirety. So, welcome. This is another one in a series of programs we started during the COVID shutdown, and it's Meet the CEO. It's a chance for us to meet some of our leading companies and our business leaders, organizational leaders throughout the South Shore. And today I think will be particularly interesting because we get to meet a company some of us have heard about, but sort of a mystery company. A lot of us don't know EMD Serono, but an incredible history. And given what's going on, I can tell from the engagement with this that a lot of people are really curious about the healthcare issues and what's happening with the research. Try to keep it conversational. We will have some Q&A towards the end, but I'm going to start with Dave Nichols. We're joined by Dave Nichols and Kirk Taylor from EMD Serono. Dave is a member of our Chamber Board of Directors, is a member of the Government Affairs Committee, has a long connection to the Chamber when we used to do DC fly-ins and bring some of our leadership down to Washington. He was down on the ground in Washington with EMD Serono there doing some of their national political advocacy work, and he would be our point person. And then through fate, he ended up coming back up to this area and now deals with state and local government affairs for Serono. They are located right next door to us. Long history. It's a company that started here on the South Shore and through various acquisitions is now part of an enormous international chain of companies in the healthcare field. Dave, thanks for joining us. I should point out you are also not just a spokesperson with the EMD Serono for government affairs, but you are also a governor's appointee to the nuclear decommissioning panel down in Plymouth. So with that, let me turn it over to you, and please tell us a little bit about yourself and some of the history of EMD Serono.
Great. Thank you, Peter. And I'm really excited to be here and also want to thank you for all the work that you and the others at the Chamber have been doing. And, it's been a kind of an unprecedented time. I think that's probably an understatement, but we're excited to be here today. So EMD Serono does have a long history. We are owned by the German Merck KGaA in Darmstadt, Germany. A couple of years ago, we celebrated our 350th anniversary. And so we're the oldest pharmaceutical company in the world. In fact, I remember at that event, our global CEO, Stefan Oshman, was with Governor Baker, and he was joking that our company was older than the state. And so that got a couple good laughs from the governor as well. But I think we've been longstanding members of the South Shore. We have therapeutic areas in multiple sclerosis, infertility, oncology. We have a very strong emerging practice in oncology. We also produce growth hormone for kids with short stature. And so I think a long, kind of strong area in the healthcare field. We also have a couple sister companies in Massachusetts and around the world. Millipore Sigma has their global headquarters up in Burlington. They are a life science business that was founded in Massachusetts originally under the Millipore name. And they produce all the equipment and materials that you need to manufacture biotechnology, life science, pharmaceuticals. So a very strong business there. And then we have another division called EMD Performance Materials. They manufacture all the raw materials that you need for manufacturing of semiconductor chips and paints and pigments, and a very diverse specialty chemical business. So in Massachusetts, we've probably got about 3,500 people. EMD Serono is on the South Shore in Rockland, obviously down the street from the Chamber, but we also have 650 people up in Billerica at a state-of-the-art global research center doing research in neurology, oncology, so some exciting activity there. So, I'm very happy to be part of the chamber and, looking forward to this conversation.
Great. Dave, would you introduce your colleague, Kirk Taylor?
Yeah,
This is my first chance, I think, Kirk, our first chance to meet, even though we are physically a 50, but it's a big company. And I think people are going to be fascinated to hear what Kirk and your medical research team have been working on.
Yeah, I mean, Kirk is one of the smartest guys I've ever met. He is our senior vice president and chief medical officer, 22 years of experience working in pharmaceuticals, medical departments, trained at Harvard and in New York, medical internship at Columbia, neurology residency at Albert Einstein College of Medicine. A lot of New York in there. I think he's a New York native, but also did some time out in California to see what the West Coast was like. He's worked for some of the biggest companies in the world, Pfizer, Biogen, Sanofi, and has been with us now for about a year and a half, running our medical affairs group in the US, and just really, really fortunate to have somebody of his caliber to work with EMD Serono. And Kirk, I'll turn it over to you if you want to make any other remarks.
Well, thank you. Wow, choked up. I wish my mom could have heard that. That would have been nice. No, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and I've been looking forward to this. It's one of those meetings you look forward to when you wake up in the morning. You say, "Great, I'm going to meet new people and share some ideas, especially the neighbors." Yeah, no, working as Dave said very eloquently, with the history of the company and what we're doing currently, we are working in three major areas from a pharmaceutical perspective, that being oncology, with 3 products in multiple therapeutic areas, multiple tumor types, of neurology and immunology, where we have our multiple sclerosis portfolio and growing. We have ibrutinib coming, which is not approved, which we're in phase 3 trials. It's public information. We're very excited about the potential of that product. And fertility and endocrine, and I'll tell you, that was a big aha moment when I joined the company, and I went to the big congress in that area, and certainly fertility, and realized we are the world leader in that area, and we help a lot of people, and people help us. So it's been a wonderful partnership, and that's why I'm excited about this conversation, because the only way we can succeed is really knowing our audience and partnering with the external environment.
So give us a little look behind the scenes as to what, if anything, EMD Serono or your family of companies in around the world are doing with the current pandemic.
Yeah, so I'll start with that, Peter. I think it's a great question. I can remember I was looking back through some what seemed like old emails now, but were only emails at the end of February, early March. And we were working very closely with the South Shore Chamber to try and get the lieutenant governor to come and visit. And this has been an effort that we have been working on for it seems like more than a year, maybe 2 years. And we finally got a date, and it was March 26th, and we were all excited, and we were going to bring the whole company together in Rockland. And I remember having to call Peter really at the beginning of March and be like, I don't think we're going to be able to do this. We're getting guidance out of Germany that we're not supposed to be shaking hands, and they're closing our facilities and not letting visitors in. And I just don't see any way that they're going to let us do this event. And I think that we had a little bit, I don't want to say it was early warning, but some earlier experience in watching how this was going to move forward. We've got a gigantic presence in China, and I was with a bunch of our China colleagues in January over in Germany, and they couldn't go back to China, and they were all kind of stuck in Germany because things were rapidly escalating in China. And that was a good learning, I think, for the company globally. I mean, 350 years, they've been through plagues and pandemics and world wars and a lot of history. So they were, I don't want to say they were prepared for this, because I'm not sure you could ever be prepared for it, but they took it seriously. And so we started getting guidance to shut things down in the US, I think, a lot earlier than a lot of other companies. And that really, I think, served us well. We've had very few cases globally of, I say Merck employees, but EMD Serono / global Merck employees. And that's been a real benefit. We've looked at very quickly in the US getting involved in the debate. I mean, we have 71 facilities in 21 states with a heavy manufacturing presence around the country, particularly in Wisconsin, in Missouri, here in Massachusetts. And we realized that states were coming up with different definitions for essential employees. And it was important for us to be able to, given the business we're in supplying medical equipment and supplying manufacturing equipment and supplying drugs for people, that we had to make sure that our facilities were up and running. So we contracted with a vendor called Multistate. They were able to put a database together for us. We started tracking in every state where we have a facility what the requirements were. We hired 11 lobbyists in different states almost overnight, and our contracting never works that fast, to be able to go in and interact with governors and states where we saw problems with the definitions of essential employees. And in the very beginning of this, there really wasn't a clear definition. It wasn't until the federal government came out with their Homeland Security list that started to define essential employees. So for the most part, all of our folks that were involved in manufacturing stayed up and running. We never closed our doors at any of our facilities, with the exception of one paints and pigments lab in Philadelphia, which we just couldn't justify keeping open. And, it's been business as usual. I think our leadership has been impressed with our productivity and working from home. I'm in my kid's bedroom. I think a lot of our employees in Rockland are doing the same, finding unique places in their homes. I see a lot of new homes on the screen here as well. And so we're continuing to work and continuing to function. We are slowly repopulating in China and in Europe, and inviting people to come back to the office and putting a variety of screenings, and very consistent with the CDC guidance that's out there. So it hasn't been a fall off a cliff like some other industries have experienced for us. We've been very fortunate in that respect. And I think the people that rely on our products, have been able to count on us. We particularly see a ton of growth in the life science business. We're very involved in some of the vaccine manufacturing that's going on with clinical trials. We're involved in some of the pharmaceutical manufacturing that's going on and producing all of that equipment. We've just announced we're almost going to double the size of our facility in Danvers to produce some of the life science equipment that comes out of there. So, so there's a huge demand and a huge kind of need for some of the products that we're producing as well.
Dave, why does a pharmaceutical company have a paints and pigment lab?
That's a great question. So remember to think of us as a diverse pharmaceutical and specialty chemical company. And this whole EMD Performance Materials division produces specialty chemicals for manufacturing of semiconductor chips. They produce paints and pigments that are made into, almost a metallic glitter. So if you've got a fancy sports car and it's got that metallic shine to it, we don't make the paint, but we make the glimmer and the metallic shine that goes into that paint. And I think the Merck family, we're a family-owned company. We're not publicly traded, except for a small percentage in Germany. And they've always wanted a diverse business. And so this is one of the ways that they diversify the business.
So how does the United States compare to what you've seen in Europe and other parts of the world with government policy or public response to the pandemic?
I think with the exception of China, which has had, it's just a very different environment and a lot of different controls that are in place there. The European reaction towards business was largely the same as it was in the US, with the exception that in the US, the policies were a lot more fragmented. We were following orders from the governors in the US. We're following orders from the state health department, orders from the county health department, and in some cases, orders in the city. And all of our facilities had to comply with whatever we're trying to figure out which was the order that was the most restrictive and which one we had to comply with. In Europe, it was largely done at the state level. It wasn't really done within those individual countries. And so it was much easier, more uniform for them to follow the regulations. Here, if we were doing something in all 50 states, we'd probably be following close to 2,000 different government entities that are issuing orders on the pandemic. So I think that was probably a big difference in the US compared to other places.
So I should know this since you sit on our government affairs committee, but how many states are you responsible for and operating in personally? You're out of the federal portfolio, so you're still in DC somewhat, but how many state capitals are you working?
Yeah, so I would say we are in 21 states, but realistically we focus on what I call the big five, which are Massachusetts, Missouri, Wisconsin, California, and then to a certain extent in Texas. are probably the big 5 capitals where I go. And Pennsylvania.
And Wisconsin and Missouri, I think, would surprise people on this call because we think of biopharma as coastal industries. So very briefly, because I want to get to the South Shore's Dr. Fauci and to explain to us how this research works and what Kirk is predicting. But what do you have just for comparison in Missouri and Wisconsin?
Yeah, so the family, you know, as they've been doing acquisitions in the U.S., the Merck family, they purchased a company called Sigma Aldrich. Sigma Aldrich was the largest supplier of kind of research material and medical raw materials for everything utilized in the development of pharmaceuticals. Their headquarters was in Missouri, so we've got about 1,800 people in the St. Louis area and St. Louis proper, mostly doing manufacturing on that side. And then in Wisconsin, it's the same. We have a big life science manufacturing equipment business in Wisconsin with about 1,300 people there.
Okay.
So we've got about 12,000 in the U.S. total now.
So this would be another call, and we're setting something up with University of Massachusetts, Bridgewater University, and Senator DiMacedo, looking at biotech and manufacturing in Massachusetts. But when you mention what's going on in those other states, would it be safe to say that Massachusetts is fortunate to have such a big biotech center, but it's no guarantee that we keep it next year, that every state is in this industry, and we've always got to try to be competitive to keep it?
Yeah, I think that's right. And it's not only competitive to keep the business in the US, but for a global company like us, we can put that business anywhere. It makes sense for us to have a lot of manufacturing in Massachusetts and in some other areas of the country where we have a home base, but it's extremely competitive. And we work with the Office of Economic Development in Massachusetts to talk about incentives of how we can convince the Merck family that it continues to be a good investment in Massachusetts to build manufacturing here.
Good. Well, everyone should check our event calendar and emails because we are working on something with Bridgewater University. Benny, what is the formal title? I want to call it Bridgewater University, University of Massachusetts at Bridgewater.
It's Bridgewater State.
Thank
Bridgewater
you.
State University.
Morning now, the new normal. But we are working on a program that will be open to the full membership, looking at that issue as we think about economic recovery. Kirk, let's get into the medicine, not too deeply into the science. You know, at least with the host, you have a very limited audience in understanding the science. But what can you tell us? We're all hearing stuff nationally on the news, but what is your take on when we might develop the vaccine or some of the treatments?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And we've been thinking about it now probably every day in our homes for 3.5 months, and certainly got inklings of it in January, right? When this thing started to kick off in China, December, January. Yeah, so just starting in the middle there, you know, there's been a lot of press, a lot of articles, and a lot of mixed data on hydrochloroquine, you know, from Washington itself all the way to the researchers across the country, multiple studies. And the data is equivocal. The data is equivocal. Some would say absolutely it's worked, and I have some patients, again, in a maybe not as well-controlled trial. Others are saying there's no statistical significance, so there's no or related proof in the big studies that have recently come out, one particular study. But as you know, hydrochloroquine was used and is being used to prevent malaria in Africa for decades and decades. And there's been a lower incidence there of the virus in Africa. Now, there could be multiple factors, but this is one of the reasons people are thinking, should we still explore this, given what we know it can do in other areas? Okay. So we don't have a treatment. We have some cocktails. We've gotten better, I think, at the critical care points of treating the vaccine, treating the virus with the ICU and in the hospital units. In terms of a vaccine itself, there are 2 leaders right now, although I counted 10 companies that are at least in phase 1. And I'll, you know, to explain that very briefly, you know, there's usually 4 parts of a clinical approval of a drug, right? Phase 1 is the safety, that's first in man. You've tested it in the animals, you've done all the preclinical work, and then you go into humans. You look for safety. You want to make sure do no harm. You don't want to make people worse with giving a new treatment. Phase 2 is the safety and efficacy. So you're still safety, but hey, does this really work in the population we're looking at? Phase 3 is now we're going big. We want big efficacy in a larger population. We want to prove that this thing can work more generically or systemically in the population, and of course, safety as well. After phase 3, typically, and that's your phase 3, phase 1 through 3 is typically the program in most therapeutic areas. You then file it to the FDA, they review it. If it matches their standards, quality, efficacy, safety, you go through, you get a label, and you can market the drug in the United States. Similar processes in other countries around the world, but the FDA manages the United States. Moderna, you've probably heard of this already, but Moderna is a biotech company here in Cambridge. They have a lot of press around their mRNA, meaning they're going the genetic route. There are typically 3 types of vaccines. One is the sort of live attenuated, meaning it's a weakened virus. That's kind of your measles, mumps, the rubella, like we all got, remember, the arm we all got before to prevent. And then there's the inactive vaccine, the killed vaccine. That's the current flu vaccine that we all get, and that can hurt. That goes in the arm, and people get a little pain there. But if you've ever gotten a hepatitis A shot or a rabies shot, those are the dead viruses. And then there's the new gene viruses, gene vaccines, I should say, where a company manufactures a gene that's targeted at a certain portion of the virus. In this particular case, the S protein. We've all heard of the coronavirus. Why is it called the coronavirus? Well, if you think of a circle and the little spikes on it, it looks like a crown, so a crown kind of thing. And that spike is called the S protein. So it gives it this corona, this crown-like appearance, and they call it coronavirus, and hence then COVID-19. And you try to go, and Moderna, as well as Oxford University, develop the genetics around or decipher the genetics around this S protein and the virus. So now you can take the gene, get it into the cell, your body says, you don't belong here, creates antibodies, stimulates an immune response, and protects you against the real virus. And then our own bodies have memories, so that once they've seen it, they say, haha, if you ever come back, we can make more. And that's the whole point behind this Moderna vaccine, as well as the Oxford vaccine. We're going to give you a bit of the genetic material. Your body will recognize it as something foreign called an antigen. You develop antibodies against it. You then get some immunity, but then if it's ever seen again, then it's like, we know who you are, and we're coming after you, and we have our troops ready to go. The Oxford one, as you may know, lots of press there, is partnered with AstraZeneca. This is all public information. AstraZeneca, I don't work for AstraZeneca, but AstraZeneca published that they would have 500 to 1 billion doses of the drug ready by next year or something, if this thing works. Now they are in phase 3, and so that's AstraZeneca. AstraZeneca and Oxford. And then also you have the one Moderna, which is in phase 3 as well. The Oxford one's a little further along according to their public information. There's an article I read, public information, that they were thinking that they could potentially have a vaccine by 3rd or 4th quarter of this year. The Moderna is saying more first, maybe January of next year. This is extremely fast. You heard Fauci say, what was it, February, March, that it would take about a year to 18 months, which would put us about July of next year, whatever. And that's typically it. Now, granted, the world needs this drug. The world needs this drug, right? We've had millions of cases. We have, about 5 million people infected around the world. We cannot wait. So I can see where things would be expedited, but that's why I want to manage expectations, that this is what the companies are saying. That doesn't mean it's impossible. It's just very aggressive timelines to look for a vaccine at the end of this year or at the beginning of next year. So I hope we didn't get too scientifically deep there, but I do want to give the kind of overall flavor of the antigen being the genetic material, the antibody being what we can fight and use to fight, and that the memory would give us this immunity that we're all hoping of, so that we can take off these masks and take off our gloves and hug our relatives and have some socialization.
So let me ask you, from what I read, I can understand accelerating concept to market by accelerating manufacturing and getting ahead of that, knowing you might throw away 250 million doses of something that proves not to work. I can understand accelerating the government approval once the tests have been done. How do you accelerate the research and discovery? Is it because virtually every biotech company and scientist is doing this and collaborating? How is that process being sped up?
You know, it's a good question, and I think two portions. One, these companies didn't have to start from scratch because they used some of the learnings from the previous version. There was the SARS virus, and there was the MERS, you know, the severe acute respiratory syndrome we had not that long ago, and then the Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome. Vaccines were being developed for those, so they could take some of the technology or learnings, but they didn't have to start from square one, maybe square 10. Secondly, there's been a full court press in terms of resources. So working with the agency, instead of waiting to maybe have data to say, does this look good? You can partner with the agency to say, what do we need to actually get approval? What are we looking for? What does success look like? The other thing is, you know, recruitment. You have to enroll patients into these different phases. And the enrollment into the phase 1 and phase 2 was like a blink of an eye. You know, granted, there are a number of people who would like to participate, but I think the path was made very clear and smooth to get the patients in a compliant way. I'm not saying any rules were broken, but certainly because of the need, the necessity that the plan was put into place. So the operational part, as well as the scientific part, were made faster.
Now, I assume most companies are focusing all their resources on trying to find a discovery. Would that be correct? And if it is this going to end up having an odd effect of also delaying research and bringing to market other drugs for other diseases?
It's a great question as well. And the good news here is this does fall within the infectious disease and allergy kind of division of that's, you know, where this virus lives in the medical world. So companies have special divisions, and there are people who are specialized in that will be hyper-focused with extra resources, but they won't necessarily stop research in oncology. People still get sick, people still have cancer, people die. Multiple sclerosis, like we're doing fertility, you know, heart disease, those things, with rare diseases, that research will continue. But as a related aside, you know, COVID has also impacted whether, as you've read probably in the papers, these large centers, be it Cleveland Clinic, Harvard, Hopkins, whatever, being able to enroll or start these trials because they had to focus on their people, their people's families, and just keeping their patients healthy. Then they can consider going into trials. So as the country opens up, these trials in other therapeutic areas can start again. So I think that would be the main impact. The fact that this disease, this drug has, this virus rather, has shut down most extra activities in these research clinics, because the first priority is the patients, and of course the families of the doctors and the office staff. Now as we're opening up, they could say, okay, we'll look now more at their trials for these test drugs or these drugs in development.
Good. I've got a lot of questions, but I do want to invite people, if they have questions of either you or Dave, if you just raise your hand, and if I don't notice it, Julie or Jill will, and we'll get your questions in, or you can just text them. Mark, go ahead. You're on mute, but go ahead, and then I was going to get back.
Thank you both for joining us. And Kirk, this is a question for you. Is this going to change the future process of how we in this country and around the world manage clinical trials and drugs? Is this going to accelerate this for other medicines in the future?
Yeah, again, I don't keep saying great question, but these are really spot on. If I can make an analogy, I think we've all learned to a certain extent that we can do our jobs from home. Not everyone, but a fair number of us. I think that's going to influence how we work in the future. That doesn't mean everyone will now work from home forever, but it does mean that there may be a little more flexibility and flex hours. With drug development, now that we've seen a process that can be expedited and still produce, we hope, we really hope and pray, a safe and effective drug, well, of course, then use those best practices in the future as well for other drugs and disease areas. So to your answer, I think it can help if these things work. If they don't, they're lessons learned. But I think we'd be naive to believe that, given all the energy and lessons learned and best practices and things we will now learn because we've changed practices or improved them, that we wouldn't use them going forward. So the answer is probably a yes. To what degree, we'll have to wait and see.
So I knew EMD before it was part of Merck. I was in the legislature and involved in some effort to give some special incentives or support, including some state appropriations, I believe, to EMD for something called orphan drug support, because EMD was dealing with drugs that hit, small populations. If this weren't a pandemic and this were only hitting 100,000 people, how long would it normally take, do you think, to get something researched and out to market? 10 years, 15 years?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. About 10 years. Things have gotten better with these expedited approvals or partnerships with the agency if they think it's a orphan drug status or a partnership where they'll work with you in a modified review process. So maybe you can get that to 5 or 6. If it's a fatal disease like this one is, you see how fast things can move. What you're describing is like a rare disease. So by definition, a rare disease or orphan disease is a patient population under 200,000 people. And those exist: Gaucher's disease, Tay-Sachs, sickle cell. These diseases exist. The research efforts haven't been as pronounced for various reasons, but easily that could be 10 years, and maybe now with accelerated processes, like you say, 5 to 7. I would say, just throw this in, that the cost can easily be $1 billion plus from concept to approval in research and development costs for a drug like that. You could easily spend $1 billion trying to get one of those drugs to market.
Just for an orphan drug?
Yeah, just for an orphan drug, or a drug, just like for orphan drugs or a drug period. At most drugs could easily be, like an oncology drug, easily spend $1 billion from the concept of trying to develop it all the way to launching it.
And Peter, I would add, the probability of success here is a big factor as well. I mean, there are a lot of companies that are working on a lot of difficult diseases to treat, and the probability that they can get a drug from discovery in the lab all the way into humans over the course of 15 years is very low. I think it's only like 5% of the initial drugs that are developed that actually make it into humans and are an effective therapy. So there's huge risk for the industry out there as well. I wonder, when I read that there's 46 different trials that are going on out there, maybe 1 or 2 of those proves to be effective when we get to the end of this. And so I think that's one of the other challenges in drug development is probability of success. Absolutely.
Totally agree. We have 9 or 10 that I saw recently on a nice chart for the vaccine. And well, fantastic, woohoo, if they all hit, but chances are, to Dave's point, not all of them will make it.
Senator, do you have a question?
I do. Thank you. Thank you both for being here. This has been very informative. I appreciate it. A question in regards to, and Peter, you touched on this, the whole concept of orphan drugs. What drives a company to pursue something like this when it's such a small population? Whereas obviously with this vaccine, it's worldwide. It's there's clearly an opportunity to make, obviously a desire to do something good, but obviously make money. But what drives a big corporation like yours to pursue these orphan drugs that are very prescriptive?
Dave, do you want to go first, or I can go? But
yeah, go ahead, Kirk.
Well, again, good question. And basically, it's the unmet medical need and the passion and the focus of the company. You'll find a lot of MDs, PhDs, and JDs, whatever, at the top of a company, a CEO, and he or she will come with an idea and a passion and get funding. And that's one of the magical parts about this area we live in the Massachusetts area, that Cambridge, Boston, Somerville, Waltham, there are tons of companies looking at disease areas that don't have anything, there's nothing there, or very few things there. And there's a passion, there's a belief, there's a need, and people go after it. So maybe, in a sort of strange way of answering your question, there's a humanity push. And there's going to be, you have to keep the lights on. There's going to have to be a corporate, or at least a P&L to meet. There's going to have to be a profit and loss, because again, it's not a fund or voluntary fund, and you have to pay your bills. But I think there has to be a need which drives the case. And a lot of times I've worked in small biotech and startup companies. And you'd be surprised, a lot of times the people at the top who started have family members. Not everyone, I'm not saying it's always the rule, but have family members who've had personal experience and connection with the diseases they're studying. So that, of course, gives that passion to really try to make a difference. I don't know, Dave, if you wanted to add anything.
But I would just say, I think that companies are also finding through, as more and more personalized medicine develops, that, a therapy initially designed for a broad cross-section of cancer patients, for example, or different tumors, they find out through the clinical trial process that it only works for a certain cohort of those patients. And so you get a much smaller group, but it's an area where there's unmet need. And we've seen that in some of our oncology therapies where there really hasn't been a lot of advance. And so it could be a large chunk of patients as well initially, but then it gets narrowed down to which drug is the best for which patient.
Yeah, yeah. Just to build on something that Dave just said, is absolutely right. As we've progressed with the science, as the science has been able to decipher the genetics of these different diseases that have been around forever that couldn't be treated, we now can use those not as pilots, but as proof of concepts around the science to actually get into the personalized part, which often are these orphan diseases or diseases, rare diseases, where you can really target that specific gene because it's really neat. It's really a way of saying this is the exact gene, this is the exact disease. Let's start here and then try to go broader. Because even in multiple sclerosis, which we're sort of expert, we were experts, we've been in over 20 years, 25, 30 years of multiple sclerosis in our company. Not every drug works for every patient. So there's some belief in some trials and some editorials that maybe this is more than one disease. So to try to find the one particular target is not impossible, but it's very difficult.
Paul Grand Prix, you had a question.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I'm just curious whether Serono is working on therapies as opposed to vaccines, and also whether or not the timelines for discovery or approvals for therapies are any different than they are for vaccines.
Yeah, so I'll start with the what I think is the corporate answer. So we're not developing any unique therapies for COVID. We are looking and participating in a clinical trial with one of our existing multiple sclerosis drugs to see if that has any impact on COVID patients. And that's a study that's actually being done in France and in cooperation with the World Health Organization. And then on our life science side, we are involved in, I think, 46 different clinical trials on vaccines with regard to providing the equipment and the knowledge and the technology and the manufacturing process there. And so we wouldn't necessarily make the vaccine, but we'd make all the equipment for a company to be able to make it.
Right, absolutely. In terms of therapeutic treatments, absolutely. So as I was saying, in development, again, public information, we have a product in development, not approved yet, evobrutinib for multiple sclerosis, which is a therapy, which is a treatment for multiple sclerosis, which we think will be an advancement over the current treatments. There are like 17 products already on the market for multiple sclerosis, but no cure. And not every one of those products works for every one person. So we think this would be an advancement. So we have two products. Rebif has been on the market for over 20 years. And of course, Mavenclad, we just launched that product, which is wonderful, in terms of what it could do. But again, these are therapies. Same thing for oncology, as Dave pointed out. We have some very exciting news. We just announced at the large ASCO meeting around one of our products. And that's a therapeutic treatment as opposed to a vaccine. I think you also asked about timelines. Those phase 1 to phase 3, 18 months is very fast, even is extremely fast for phase 1 to phase 3. A drug for like multiple sclerosis could easily be 5 to 6 to 7 years again, because your phase 3 trials, depend upon your indication, it could be well over a year to get them done, just for the trial itself and then processing. So 7 years, from maybe even 8, 9, 10 from phase 1 all the way to phase 3.
So everyone's very hopeful about a cure, but right now there's enormous stress for so many people having to deal with this or deal with family members. Dave, EMD Serono has been a leader on looking at this issue of caregiving with employers. And before the shutdown, in addition to the lieutenant governor coming down, you and Julie Williams on our staff were working on a caregiver program. But tell us a little bit about EMD Serono's caregiving initiative. Don't tell everything, because we're still going to have this program, I hope, in the fall. it goes beyond COVID, but talk a little bit about the issue of caregiving for employers who have employees with family members that have issues.
Yeah, so EMD Serono a couple of years ago, globally, but with a heavy focus in the US, launched a program called Embracing Carers. And I think it was really a realization on our part, or at least more of a focus on our part, that it's not just about treating the patient, but it's also treating the people that take care of the patient. And as we started to look at that more holistic view of how you provide for the well-being of the families in our community and families around the country and around the globe, that caregiver piece was one that was a really important element for us. We recognized that, oftentimes people providing caregiving die sooner than the people they're providing the care for, that the stress there of providing care for people is tremendous. So we've launched a website, embracingcarers.org, I believe it is. And that has a ton of resources. But we've also been doing some nice partnerships. We have partnered with the State Office of Elder Affairs and the Mass Health Technology Initiative to do some programs on caregiving, and really recognizing that a lot of businesses out there have caregivers within their workforce, and they don't always know how to cope with or to recognize the stress that causes for the employer, never mind the stress that the caregiver has and the person they're taking care of. So we're also trying to provide resources and real examples of how employers can deal with caregivers within their workforce. I think we've got a lot of great case studies on that, a lot of real data. There's been a study that's done just showing the need in Massachusetts, and the statistics were quite startling. I think it's 1 in 5 people raises their hand that they're a caregiver of some sort, whether it's a person with a disability, an elderly parent, somebody who gets sick unexpectedly. And that does put a lot of stress on the workforce. There's a lot of economic impact associated with it, as well as the obvious healthcare impacts that are out there. So it's a real commitment from the company, and I think we see this across all of the states where we do work, to recognize that it's not only the patient that we're helping take care of, but it's the people that are helping that patient get through whatever they're dealing with.
Dave, EMD Serono is unusual from most big national companies, and certainly the big international, in the level of involvement and engagement you seem to have with your local communities. I suspect it's not just because your headquarters is next door to us. Why is EMD Serono so involved in the community? Why are you so involved with the Chamber of Commerce? We are the 3rd largest chamber, but there are lots of business organizations. What is with the corporate philosophy or culture that you're giving back and getting involved in local communities the way you do?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think a lot of it stems from being family owned and not necessarily being beholden to a quarterly report, although those quarterly reports are good. But taking a longer term, when you've got a family that has been around for 350 years, there's 138, I think, family members, don't quote me on the exact number, that still, are involved as part of running the company globally. And that puts out some really strong values that, when they've been in a town in Germany for 350 years, they put down roots. And they're not a company that comes in typically and will buy up things and then sell them and then turn them around and close them and move people around. They've really established those roots in the community, and that community involvement is important. Not only are we involved with the South Shore Chamber, I was painting a playground at a Rockland Elementary School last year as part of our service day. So I think that we see a lot of value in having a strong community partnership, having strong businesses around us that interact with us. We use a lot of local vendors for a lot of our activity in Rockland and everywhere we have a facility. And so that's really important as part of, as you said, Peter, part of that culture of the company that's existed, at least in my experience, over the last 13 years.
That's great. Kirk, what else are you working on when we get through this? Where is the focus going to be for you?
Yeah, we're going to continue with our three, therapeutic pillars or platforms: multiple sclerosis, neurology, immunology, oncology. Again, we're launching very soon a product in urothelial cancer. We're very excited about. We shared some really practice-changing. We've been told it's practice-changing data along those lines for our product. It's not licensed yet. We're waiting for approval, and also our fertility and endocrine business. COVID-19 was, you'd say, what did you learn about? It was world changing, in my opinion, but I think it's proven. It's world changing in that, like tuberculosis and HIV, older attendings when I was in training would say, we learned the medical system through tuberculosis and HIV because it impacted all the organs. And we learned slowly. Remember, first it was just the lung, we thought, and then maybe a little kidney. We found COVID impacts the whole body in terms of the brain. It can go to different areas and not just the lung. So with that, we have to say, understand where we need to continue looking in terms of, okay, stop. What did we learn here? And now how do we re-engage? And you were getting at that before in terms of the clinical trials. So fertility, our other pillar, was certainly impacted because the fertility centers were given guidance to stop. This is a very delicate procedure. It's it's a personal choice, but it's something you can't really have any kind of infection, and certainly when people are immunocompromised or when you have any kind of virus going around. So now we're coming back. The centers are opening up again. They're asking for guidance. They're asking for guidance in this post-COVID world. So one large focus we have for really all of our therapeutic areas is, how do you use our products safely and effectively in this post-COVID world? How do you have guidance? And we have virtual advisory boards now. We don't necessarily like this. We don't have people in the same room, but we can talk to folks around the world, via Zoom or FaceTime or something like that. So the key is using what we've learned, gathering new information, continuing the partnership locally, regionally, nationally. And that's one thing I love about the company, that it's your neighbor next door or 3,000 miles away. What is it about? And with that, then we'll be able to get the products that we need to the patients that really need them, the right product at the right time.
So the response to this,
Peter, I would just add, that, I think the company's at the forefront of the digital transformation as well. And when we look at the focus and the impact coming out from our global CEO, Stefan Oshman, he's very committed to a digital transformation. I mean, we have some of that element with our semiconductor manufacturing, but I think you'll see a lot more digital platforms, digital communication, digital ways to use data effectively to advance healthcare. And the company's really at the forefront of that. And that's only going to be accelerated as we go through this process and people are utilizing digital more in everyday life.
So is that in terms of the research or in terms of the delivery of care and
both?
Yeah, I think it's all of those.
Both, yeah, because we were talking to the Cleveland Clinic and also Stanford, and whereas like a neurologist, initially telemedicine's been around for a while, right? We've all known the last 10 years you could see your doctor virtually if you really, really wanted to. We didn't, right? We wanted to go in. It's 70-80% of the practices, or I should say 70-80% of the visits at these practices, and 70% of practices have switched over to telemedicine for obvious reasons. Some of it may not go back. The personal one-on-one appointments will continue, but sometimes now it'll be like, I can share your lab results with you virtually, Mrs. Jones or Mr. Jones. So from the virtual platform, it will continue delivering the care, but also us, we need to engage with our doctors. That can happen digitally as well.
and that would be in terms of how to advise using your drugs, because you're not going to do drug use virtually.
No. So we would be seeking advice, right, from doctors on, so what do you need to know about our particular drug or about the particular label? And that would be these advisory boards and things like that. They can ask, and they come to us, they can ask us questions, they can ask our sales people, our representatives in the field virtually, or our medical representatives. And that's happening right now.
Yeah. So when I look at what's happening, there seem to be 3 levels of engagement on taking on COVID and then the reopening. You've got the science, you've got the government actions, and then you have the private sector or the public activity, which includes a lot of businesses adjusting what they do. But all three of those going on. What are we getting right? And what are we getting wrong from what we can see right now with COVID that might be applicable to the next terrible thing 5 years down the road?
I have one comment. I know David, we're smiling. David and I talk about this a lot on
Go
these
ahead.
committees, but I'll just jump into that. Dave will probably have some great ideas as well. Frankly, let's look at the U.S. and I'm not in charge of the U.S. Not externally, I'm not in the government, but the U.S. is about 4% of the world population, right? We know that. And we had 28% of the COVID-19 cases in the world. Statistically, that doesn't make sense. So something went wrong there, or maybe it was a great lesson learned. So the next time we face something like this, we have to realize, what were we missing so that we wouldn't have 4% of the world population and nearly 8, at least 7 times the number of cases. We knew that in terms of the CDC reported that whereas, let's say African Americans are 14% of the population of the country, they had 30% of the cases of COVID-19. So somewhere there's a discrepancy. So we have to make sure that people have access. I think if we have another crisis like this, that we are able to face it. So there are different lessons learned here, I think. And then reopening, and what we're doing and partnering with you, look what this call right now, I think is critical to have with the community to say what is needed to understand what's happening with COVID, since we have a biopharmaceutical company right down the road, and as well as what you guys are doing to be sensitive to the needs of the people who work at the company. And we've been doing that with flex hours and people who have children and they don't have the health, they don't have the childcare, camps are closed, they may not be able to come in. So I don't know, Dave, if you've had any additional.
Yeah, I think that the issues of testing, there's probably a lot of work to be done on the testing side. I mean, there was a rush to use tests. There was guidance that was kind of all over the place with regard to testing and how do companies utilize testing, as well as how to public health agencies utilize testing, both to see if you have the disease and to see if you have the antibody. I've heard it described as the wild, wild west with regard to some elements of that testing there. And I think we'll have to figure out, and when we look back on this, how to restructure some of that process around testing. I would say also having the I guess luxury of looking at 21 different states and how they've reacted to this, and with the business community, the communication piece from the government is really important. And watching how Massachusetts has communicated to business at times has been frustrating, but it's been frustrating in every state. I don't think Massachusetts is unique in that, but hopefully there'll be some lessons learned about the type of information that businesses need in order to figure out, is this a requirement? Is this a should versus a shall or a must? And all of those words in these sentences there cause a lot of confusion. So I'm not sure we really got that right. Granted, it's unprecedented and nobody had done this before, but there's going to be an important, valuable lesson, I think, when we look back about how some of this guidance was put out and how businesses need to be able to react to it.
Absolutely. Good lessons learned.
Great. For those of you who are not familiar with the immediate neighborhood, we think of the South Shore as a fairly small, isolated, parochial area. It's all about, us and maybe going back 2 generations. Dave mentioned the company is 450 years old.
350.
That's right. You're the kid. Up
That's
the
right.
street is Zildjian, which is a 450-year-old family. So, it's funny when we think on the South Shore 10 years is ancient history. We have 2 companies that combined have 800 years of family history just in this little corner of the world, which is pretty amazing. Dave, thank you for everything you've done for the Chamber and what EMD Serono has done for the area. Kirk, thank you very much for joining us. This was very informative. I look forward to bumping into you when we're able to get out and walk and you're back in the office. We'll we'll have a cup of coffee or meet on the road at some point. We are right up the street. But thank you all. We'll be doing this the next few Tuesdays with some other guests, and check our calendar. And with that, say thank you and good morning.
Right. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Excellent.